Marcus, remember me? You may not have chose me, but I choose.
I wanna be with you.
The rain did not stop for it. That was the first obscene thing Marcus understood, that the sky kept doing exactly what it had been doing, indifferent, while the world ended on the wet asphalt of 4th Street. He was on his knees before he knew he'd moved. Devon lay in the sodium glow, the gray bison hoodie soaked dark, one arm flung wide, and Marcus's hands hovered over him, shaking, afraid to touch, afraid that touching would make it true. Devon, look at me. You don't get to... His voice broke off a cliff. Somewhere behind him, red taillights bled away into the rain at the end of the street, unhurried, a man driving off at exactly the speed of innocence. And somewhere close, Sloane's voice, flat and exact, was giving an address to a 911 operator. Julian reached them at a dead run, uniform soaked black, and did the thing he was trained to do, pressed his hands where they needed to be, spoke in the clipped calm of a man holding a line. But Marcus saw the soldier's mask over what was breaking behind it. The ambulance came apart of the rain in red pulses. They worked fast, the way people work when seconds are load-bearing, and lifted Devon, and Marcus climbed in without asking because there was no version of this where he let go of that hand. Under the cabin light, he looked down and saw the blood on his own palms and understood with a cold clarity that frightened him that it was not his. It was Devon's. And it was the only thing in the world that felt like it belonged to him. The waiting room was a purgatory of fluorescent light and vending machine hum. Marcus sat rigid, spine straight as a plumb line, hands open on his knees, palms up because he could not make himself wash them yet. Julian sat on one side of him, close, a hand on his back. Sloane sat on the other, the manila folder still clutched against her chest, the dossier, the letter, the pattern, dry. Because even here, even now, she did not set down the thing that could bring the man down. Nobody spoke. There was a clock, and it did not hurry. Marcus stared at the double doors and did the only thing his body knew how to do with terror. He began, quietly, to draw. Load path. Where the weight goes. As if a building could be engineered to hold this. To survive the waiting, he went backward, because backward was the only direction that still had Devon Hole in it. September, the rain, his first week, the homesickness he'd had no name for. Devon coming through the door at 2 a.m. with a contraband hot plate and a sack of catfish, barefoot, grinning, in that gray bison hoodie that smelled of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either. You've been staring at that desk for 9 hours, Thorne. Even God rested. Devon had not asked a single question. Devon had just crossed the room and put his arms around a soaked, shaking boy and held on until the shaking stopped. The first hands to reach Marcus in months. He had spent every week since pretending he didn't remember the exact temperature of being held. He remembered it now. He would remember it forever. A doctor came out once, midway, still in a cap, and spoke in the careful grammar of people trained to hand out hope in exact doses. The car had done what a car does. They were working. It was bad. They should prepare themselves and also not give up. The 2 impossible instructions delivered in one breath. Marcus asked the only question his mouth could form. Is he awake? No, the doctor said gently. He hasn't been since the street. and Marcus understood that the last thing Devon had ever done conscious in this world was put his hands on Marcus's chest and shove him toward the curb, that the final act of a life had been to spend it without hesitation, without being asked on him. Sloane found the detective before the detective found them. Marcus watched her cross the waiting room to the man in the wet overcoat and speak low and precise. And he understood he was watching the birth of something. A woman who would spend her whole life being the most dangerous person in the room, choosing tonight to point all of it at one man. She came back and crouched in front of Marcus, eye to eye. "They're calling it a hit and run," she said. "But you saw him, behind the wheel. Say it once to me now, clean, so it never changes." Her voice did not soften. It was the kindest thing anyone could have done. "Who was driving the car, Marcus?" Marcus met her eyes. "Alistair Vaughn," he said. "I saw his face." "Then we have him," Sloane said. "Whatever else happens tonight, we have him." Word travels on a campus even at 3 a.m. Julian's phone lit with his father's name, and Marcus watched the cadet go rigid, the specific stillness of a boy raised under a general. "He's heard there was an incident," Julian said. "He wants to know if I was involved, if I was exposed." He laughed, one broken sound with no humor in it. "My best," he caught himself, chose the braver word. "The man I love is on a table, and my father wants to know if it will embarrass him." Marcus looked at him. Then, "Don't answer it." Julian silenced the phone, set it face down. It was, Marcus understood, the first order Julian had ever refused in his life, and he had refused it standing next to Marcus. That, too, would matter later. She came off a red-eye from Atlanta near dawn, still in her church coat, and the room reorganized itself around her grief, the way rooms do around the truly bereaved. Mama Price, Devon's mother. She had his exact bright eyes, and when she used them on Marcus, he braced for blame and received something worse. "You're Marcus," she said. "He wrote me about you. Every letter." She took his ruined hands in both of hers, the blood long since washed, but the memory of it not. "My boy said you were the smartest person he ever met and the loneliest. He said somebody had to stand next to you." Her voice held. That was his idea of a good time, standing next to people who needed it. Marcus opened his mouth, and nothing came out. She squeezed his hands. "Don't you dare carry this as a debt," she said. "He'd hate that. He gave it. You hear me? He gave it." They kept a vigil the way the young keep vigils, badly, refusing chairs, drinking terrible coffee Sloane kept producing from somewhere. Julian prayed under his breath in a cadence his mother must have taught him before the army taught him not to. Mama Price hummed something low. Marcus did not pray. Marcus drew load paths on the back of an intake form until the pen ran dry, and then he pressed the dry pen into the paper anyway, over and over, engraving nothing. Around 5 a.m., a machine somewhere changed its tone. Feet moved fast behind the double doors, and the particular quality of the quiet that came after told them, before any human mouth could, what the machine had already said. There are sounds the body files away forever in a room it never opens again. Marcus would keep this one his whole life, not a loud sound. The opposite, the sound of a room where a machine has stopped insisting. Mama Price made a noise that belonged to no language. Julian caught her, and Marcus. Marcus stood very straight in the fluorescent light and felt something begin to set in him the way concrete sets. Fluid one moment, and then, with no announcement, load-bearing and cold and permanent. He did not cry, not here, not in a fluorescent room full of strangers not standing up. He noted the stillness in himself with a clinical distance, as if observing a structure under load, and did not yet understand that he was only holding the line until he could find somewhere private to set it down. They let him see Devon after. The room was too quiet and too clean. Marcus stood at the edge of it, hands at his sides, and did not sit, because sitting was a thing you did when you intended to stay, and he did not know how to stay in a world arranged like this. "You weren't even supposed to be here," he said to the still shape of the first person who ever held him without a price. "I never asked you to come. You never asked. You just—" His hands rose an inch and stopped. "You always just came." And the thing he had been building against all night, the cold, the composure, the careful straight line of his spine, gave way all at once, the way a wall gives not slowly, but in a single breath, when the load finally exceeds the span. He went down at Devon's feet. The sound that tore out of him had no architecture to it at all. It was the one thing in him grief could not organize into line. He felt her before he saw her. The smell of a church coat worn through a red eye, of Atlanta and ginger, and something steadier than either. Mama Price lowered herself to the cold floor beside him. This woman who had lost more than he had and had flown all night to do it. And she gathered him in the exact way. He understood that she must once have gathered the boy in the gray hoodie, the same arms, the same hold, Devon's warmth, reaching him one last time through the person who made it. "I got you," she said into his hair, her own tears falling into it. "I've got you, baby." And so did he. Don't you dare forget he wanted to. They stayed there a long time, the two of them on the floor of a too-clean room, holding the shape of what they'd lost between them. It was the last time Marcus Thorne would let himself weep. He did not decide it there, in her arms, but something in him marked the line. The way you mark the high-water stain on a wall after the flood pulls back. This far. Never again. This is the moment, if you are looking for it. The hinge of an entire life. He had wept himself empty on the floor of that room, and into the hollow the weeping left, quietly. The concrete began to pour. 18 years old, Marcus Thorne made a decision he did not have words for and would never take back. That the soft place under his ribs, the fatherless, starving place that Devon had loved without a price, was a structural flaw, a point where the load exceeded the span, a weakness that got people killed. So he sealed it, not all at once, but it started here, in the hours after the last of his tears. He began, quietly and forever, to translate every feeling into structure and line, because structure could bear weight that feeling could not. He would build a career, a body, a self, out of everything his grief could not hold. He would call it discipline. The truth was simpler. It was a tomb with a boy in it. Hours or years later, Julian found him on a bench outside the hospital, perfectly still, perfectly composed. The most frightening thing Julian had ever seen. He sat down and put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. Those trembling soldiers' hands steady now. Steady because Marcus needed them to be, and he held them. He did not say, "It's not your fault," because grief does not take instruction. "You don't have to be okay," Julian said into his hair. "Not with me. You never have to be okay with me." Marcus let himself be held. He even leaned in, and he meant it. From the outside, it would have looked like the beginning of healing. But Julian could feel it under the embrace, the new hardness, the wall already curing. He was holding Marcus. He just wasn't sure Marcus was still all the way inside. Here is the cruelty the audience must feel. Marcus was loved. He was held and chosen, and the soldier who smelled like the ocean was not going anywhere. By every law of story, this should have been the moment he was saved. And it wasn't enough, because the lesson had already been carved. And the lesson was this: love and loss are the same beam. Devon loved me, and loving me is what killed him. The closer you let someone stand, the more of you dies when they fall. Julian held him under a graying sky, and Marcus held him back. And at the very same time, in the cold new architecture of him, he began drawing the plans for the distance he would one day put between himself and everyone. Even this man. Even the son they did not yet know they would have. The dorm was unbearable. Devon's side of room 4B was exactly as he'd left it. The contraband hot plate, one cleat on its side, the gray spare hoodie thrown over the desk chair, still holding the shape of his shoulders. Marcus sat on his own bed for a long time and did not touch any of it. Then he stood and squared Devon's cleat beside its pair and folded the hoodie along its seams, precisely the way you fold a flag, and set it on the pillow. It was the first thing he ever built out of grief. It would not be the last. He was learning that week that you could survive anything if you turned it into a task, that a broken heart, disassembled carefully enough, was just a set of objects that needed squaring. Vaughn did what Vaughn did. He did not flee, because fleeing is what the guilty do, and he had never once thought of himself as catchable. He lawyered. He let it be known through the right channels that a grief-stricken student's account of a rainy night was a fragile thing, that a tenured man of his standing had enemies, that these things had a way of quietly going away. He had built a career on the certainty that the world bends to protect the man worth more standing than the people he breaks. He had not accounted for Sloane Kensington. He had thought her a clever girl in a basement. He had made, for the first time in his life, an error of load. Sloane laid it out on the clinic table like a blueprint because that was a language Marcus could still hear. On their own, each piece bends, she said. Your eyewitness, a distraught kid, they'll say. The grooming dossier, a pattern, but old, protected. The car, if he scrubbed it, deniable. She set them down one atop the other. But stacked, motive, means a body and a witness who never wavered. That's not a he said anymore, Marcus. That's a structure. Each piece holds the next one up. For the first time in days, something like fire moved behind her eyes. He spent his whole life pulling out other people's load-bearing walls. I'm going to hand a prosecutor the one under him. Marcus looked at her and understood he had found the person he would call for the rest of his life. They needed Marcus to say it on the record, to sit across a table from people with badges and lawyers and repeat what he'd seen, knowing Vaughn's people would come for his grief, his youth, his every crack. Sloane didn't soften it. It will cost you, she said. They'll put your worst night on a table and take it apart. You don't have to. Marcus thought of Devon coming off the curb without being asked. He thought of a life spent about to be spent on him. Yes, I do, he said. It was the same word almost as the no he'd given Vaughn in the office, the most expensive word he owned. Paid again, gladly this time. Set it up. I'll say it as many times as it takes. The reckoning, when it came, was quiet and total, the way real things are. The stack held eyewitness, pattern, forensic, motive, each piece bearing the next, exactly as she'd drawn it. A grand jury did what grand juries do when a structure is sound. And Alistair Vaughan, who had never once been told no in a room he chose to enter, was told it at last by a room full of strangers who did not care about his tailoring. Marcus sat in the back the day it turned, in his pressed black turtleneck, and watched a powerful man lose the only thing that had ever protected him, the certainty that the world would bend. He felt no triumph. He had learned from Vaughan himself how to keep his face a clean wall while something is demolished behind it. Among the things that came out, in the end, was the photograph, the leash, the trembling hand, the whole rotten architecture of it, entered into a record where it could no longer be used as a weapon because it had become evidence. Julian sat very still when he learned it would be public. Then, he did the bravest thing Marcus ever saw him do. He picked up the phone he had silenced in the hospital hall, and he called his father, the general, and he told him, before Vaughan could, before a newspaper could, before the world could hand it to him as a wound, exactly who his son was. Marcus did not hear the other end. He only saw Julian's hand trembling and then slowly going still. He hung up, Julian said. But I said it standing up. That's the part that's mine. They buried Devon in Atlanta, under a sky that had the nerve to be beautiful. Mama Price sang. The Morehouse cousins came, and the Howard team came in their navy, and the church smelled of lilies and the fried catfish reception waiting in the fellowship hall below, because grief and appetite keep company in a black church the way they always have. Marcus was asked to speak and could not. He stood at the front with his mouth a sealed wall and his hands folded and the silence stretched, and just when it became unbearable, Mama Price rose from the front pew, crossed to him, and simply stood next to him, shoulder to shoulder, facing the room. "That's all right, baby," she said, loud enough for the mic to catch. "He was better at standing next to people than talking to. You learned it from the best." That night back in D.C., Marcus took out the one possession he had carried from Baltimore on the Greyhound, his dead father's worn leather trumpet case, the trumpet long since pawned, the case kept, empty, the shape of the absence preserved. He set it in his lap on the narrow bed beside Devon's folded hoodie, and he held the two things his grief had given him, one inherited, one earned, and he pressed his thumbs to the latches and did not open them. "I'm sorry," he said, to the case, to the hoodie, to the boy he had been in September who still believed being held was safe. "I'm so sorry." Then he closed his hands precisely and set both things on the shelf where they would stay. His father's silence, his own beginning. Before she left for her clerkship, Sloane found Marcus one last time. She did not offer comfort. She offered the truer thing, which was a future. "You're going to build," she said. "It's the only language you've got left, and it's a good one. And one day, you'll build something so big, the same kind of man who took Devon will come for it." She held out a card, her name, a number, an address that did not exist yet. "When he does, you call me. I'll have passed the bar by then. I'll be the most dangerous person in whatever room he's in." Marcus took the card. "Why?" he said. "Why me?" Because we're the same animal, Sloane said, and somebody has to be for something. 17 years later in Harlem, he would still have her number. Spring came to Howard the way it always did, indifferent and gold. Marcus and Julian stayed. The love survived, quieter now, marked, a thing they had carried through fire and would carry further. Julian redeclared for the army with his eyes open, his father's silence, a wall he had decided to live beside rather than inside. "I'm not going to try to fix you," Julian told him one evening on the bench where he'd first held him. "I know better. I'm just going to keep standing here, however long it takes, even if you never fully come back out." Marcus took his hand and stilled the tremble that still lived in it, and did not tell him the truth he already knew, that some part of him had stayed on 4th Street in the rain and would not be coming back. He let Julian believe in the after. It was the kindest lie he had left. The months that followed built the man. Marcus went cold and precise and brilliant. He won the fellowship, not Vaughn's, a clean one, on the strength of a portfolio that made hard men quiet. He learned to walk into a room and read it for load, for the places where the weight would fall, for the exits. He learned to be held without letting it reach him. He learned to say, "I love you" to Julian and mean it, and still, at the very same time, be drawing the distance. He built and built, and each thing he built was a wall with the same boy sealed behind it, and he called it discipline, and the world called it genius, and only he knew it was a tomb. The years did what years do. They gave Marcus and Julian a life and grief between them, and, when they least expected it, a child neither could have imagined, a small, solemn boy with Marcus's exact watchful eyes, whose existence Marcus would guard so fiercely and so silently that even the people closest to him would not know. He carried Devon into all of it. Every building he raised on a foundation he never named. Every time someone tried to stand too close, he heard the rain on 4th Street, and he made the distance, gently, architecturally, the way Vaughn had once made a cage, except Marcus built his own, and locked himself inside, and threw away nothing, because there was nothing left to throw. He never spoke Devon's name aloud again to anyone, not because it hurt too much to say, though it did, but because a name said aloud is a wall you let someone lean on, and Marcus had decided that no one would ever again lean on him and fall. But once a year, in the rain, he would stand at a window in a charcoal suit and let himself remember the exact temperature of being held by a boy in a gray hoodie who smelled of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either. 1 minute. No more. Then he would turn back to the blueprints, and the wall would hold. And this is the thing to carry out of the vaulted past. The truth the whole ark was built to set down. Marcus Thorne was loved. He was held by a good man and defended by a brilliant woman and mourned beside a mother who refused to let him call it a debt. He was not, in the end, alone. And it was not enough, because you cannot comfort someone out of a truth they learned with their own hands, on their own knees, in the rain. He would spend 17 years being loved and staying sealed until a man with shoulder-length locks and a mustard-yellow shirt walked onto a Brooklyn rooftop and refused to accept the wall as the whole building. If you have followed Marcus Thorne into the present, the charcoal suits, the silver watch, the loft like a cage of glass, the guarded eyes, the love he could barely let himself hold. Then you have already met the man this rain made. Now you know the rain. You know why he goes still instead of soft. Why he reads people the way he reads buildings. Why, when Elias Vance finally cracked him open, what spilled out was not weakness, but a boy on his knees on 4th Street whispering, "You never asked, you just came." Every wall has a first stone. This was Marcus Thorne's, a roommate who loved him first and never asked, a teammate who put his body between Marcus and the hit because it was the one thing he knew how to do, a boy from Atlanta who stepped into the headlights so Marcus wouldn't have to. And who, in dying, taught Marcus the terrible lesson that would build every wall of the man we meet in Harlem. His best friend died saving him. And Marcus Thorne, held by the man he loved, in the gray light of the worst morning of his life, never let himself cry again.